There it languished in obscurity, at least as far as I was concerned, until a few years back when I discovered the book on one of my internet searches for all things World War I. Finding this book meant that all of the events Roy had made mention of, I could now discover the broader context and finish the story. Roy was one of the millions of young men who volunteered or was selected by the government to fight for the U.S. in the most brutal war in the history of mankind up to that point. This work is dedicated to all the unsung soldiers who have summoned the courage to go over the top. Your story deserves to be told. I dedicate this book to the Blanchard family who shared their memories of a truly unsung hero, especially Amy Blanchard Bowden, who offered to send her grandfather's priceless letters to a total stranger, and to Clark Blanchard, who talked openly about his father and who reminds many of Roy. And finally to Catherine, Nathan, Carolyn, Elena, and Lizzie, who all inspire me in various ways and have all sacrificed to make completing this work possible. Key locations for Roy Blanchard and the 126th Infantry Regiment in France. They landed in Brest, saw their first action on the Western Front outside Belfort, and took part in major advances near Château-Thierry. Roy and the 126th were outside of Brie heavily when the war ended. The 126th occupied the German city of Echternach in 1919. Preface. Within the ranks of khaki-clad American soldiers was 19-year-old Roy Blanchard. Smartly he marched away from Paris and toward German lines on a narrow road, in line with nearly 4,700 fellow soldiers of the 126th Infantry Regiment. 4 men made up a row, 25 rows of men made up a platoon, and 100 yards separated each platoon. Most of these men were teenagers like Roy, drawn from the American Midwest. They marched in unison, singing from the small songbooks Uncle Sam had issued to U.S. soldiers to keep their minds off the long marches. Had any listeners been around, they'd have heard patriotic ballads, familiar hymns, and popular songs like It's a Long Way to Tipperary. As the road led them into a small forest, they could hear the crump, crump of artillery and the faint rat-a-tat-tat of machine gun fire in the distance. They switched to single file, adding the steady crunch, crunch, crunch of their boots on the gravel path. Their singing stopped. Distant flares and artillery flashes cast eerie shadows through the trees as they marched out of the forest and into a cool, moonless night. On the eastern outskirts of a small village, French guides joined the Americans and led Roy's 126th quietly into the front lines through the maze of support trenches and barbed wire entanglements. Following the French guides, the American soldiers stumbled and ran into each other, making slow progress in the dark. Finally, they arrived at their positions just before 4 a.m. Most of the 126th, including Roy's Company K, took positions in reserve trenches a few hundred yards behind the front lines. One group, Company I, took their spot in front of a half-mile section of trench on the front lines. The 7-foot-wide, 7-foot-deep trenches had duckboard walks and ran parallel to the German lines, except for the zigzagging communication trenches that ran out into no man's land toward the German positions. Roy, together with his buddies of Company K, entered and took his position. He stepped up on the fire step, eyes wide open, peering over the parapet and looking toward the Germans hundreds of yards away in the dark. All was quiet, save the shuffling of men in wool uniforms and the whispers back and forth. Dawn came slowly for these young men, thousands of miles from home and away from all that was familiar. In the darkness they thought back to friends and family who were all back home, safe and secure. All eyes went up as German triplanes buzzed over their lines. In an ineffective response, the French fired anti-aircraft guns at the triplane scouts. Next, they heard the distant crump, crump of artillery open up in the distance. Moments passed, and as the shells screamed down toward their position, Roy and his fellow soldiers ducked, making themselves as small a target as possible. The shell's deafening explosions sent showers of dirt and shrapnel into the air, together with the crack of sharpshooters and the rat-a-tat-tat of machine gun fire. Roy's comrade, Private Joseph W. Guyton of Company I, peeked over the parapet to return fire. But just as he raised his head into view, one bullet from a German machine gun barrage struck him in the forehead, jerking his head back and killing him instantly. The surrounding soldiers stopped and stared at Guyton's body. A moment ago he had been talking and laughing, and now he was dead. The 126th had prepared for casualties, but the reality of Guyton's immediate death, the first casualty for the 126th,